I have been a truck driver since I was 25 years old. During my career, I have driven a lot at night, and of course, I have experienced some strange things. I made deliveries for different companies and frequently had to travel across the entire state to make deliveries. One day, I had to cross the entire state to deliver several pieces of wooden furniture. A large part of the journey was through desert roads. The trip would take several hours, and I was already late to start the journey. So, I knew that most of the trip would be in the dark. Because of the characteristics of these desert roads, which are usually very straight and very empty at night, I was able to drive a little faster than normal. And because of this high speed, as soon as I saw the taillights of a car flashing, I had to brake very hard to stop the truck and park behind the car that was on the side of the road in the desert sand. The car was one of those older cars, and it had its hazard lights on. I got out of the truck because, after all, I wanted to check if someone needed help. I walked over to the car and knocked on the window. There was no response. I leaned in a bit to look inside the car through the dark windows, but I couldn't see anyone sitting inside. I did the same thing at all the windows and could confirm that there was no one inside the car. So, I started to look around the dark and cold desert. Despite this, I couldn't see more than about 15 meters in front of me. I was feeling quite sympathetic that night, so I really wanted to help. I went back to my truck and got a flashlight that was in the toolbox under the passenger seat. It was one of those tactical flashlights with a light so strong that it hurts your eyes when you point it directly at your face. As soon as I turned on the flashlight, it revealed what looked like an abandoned gas station by the side of the road. Apparently, I hadn't even noticed it before. Maybe I didn't notice because the gas station's parking lot was covered with sand and it blended in with the desert. I couldn't really see the concrete floor of the station. The abandoned building next to the station was old and had probably been a convenience store in the past. At that moment, it made sense to me that the owner of the car with the flashing lights on the side of the road was probably somewhere inside the station. I went to the front door of the station, which was completely broken, and my flashlight illuminated a good part of that place. It was what I thought. It was certainly one of those convenience stores that you can find at most gas stations. It was no surprise that the store didn't last on a road like that, with very little traffic. I shouted to see if there was anyone inside and announced that I was there to help. I heard a bit of an echo in that place, which gave me chills at the moment. Then, I heard a noise coming from the other side of the store. It sounded like a shoe rubbing against the concrete floor. That sound was coming from behind some shelves that used to be full of drinks or snacks. I shouted once more, offering my help if anyone needed it. Then, I heard a deep, heavy whisper that said something I clearly understood, but I couldn't comprehend why this person would say that. I was also hearing heavy breathing from one of the corners of that place. That was enough for me to rush out of there, walking back to my truck. This is what I heard. I was completely confused for a few seconds. I didn't know if what I was hearing was real or not. I can't explain it properly, but I felt disoriented. I ran to my truck and called the police because, honestly, I was too scared to go back inside. The police asked me for an exact location, but I didn't know exactly where I was. All I could say was that I was next to an abandoned gas station in the middle of the desert road. They asked me to stay on the phone so I could better describe the location. But suddenly, the car in front of me started and began to speed down the road. I was so disoriented that I didn't even realize when the person got into the car. It was very dark and I was distracted by the call. I ran back to the station to see if anyone was still there while I was still on the phone with the police. I went to the back of the store, where I had heard the voice and breathing. I was paralyzed to see a fresh pool of blood on the floor, and I could only imagine the cruel details of what had happened there. I told the police on the phone that I had probably just witnessed a crime. Eventually, the police sent several patrol cars to the location. They asked me if I had any information that could be useful, such as the license plate of the car, the suspect's appearance, and things like that. All I could say was that the car was old and had a dark color. I told them that I had heard a male voice telling me to leave, and then I heard a woman screaming as I was leaving that place. There was no body left behind, but I had some theories about what had happened. The police certainly collected some evidence and blood samples, but I couldn't contribute much to the investigation. Unfortunately, I didn't yet have a dashcam in my truck, which would have captured the car's license plate. But literally the following week, I bought and installed a dashcam in my truck. This was certainly one of those rare experiences that only happen once in a lifetime, and it will definitely haunt me for a long time. I have been working as a truck driver for different companies for 10 years. 3 years ago, I was working for a warehouse company making deliveries. I used to drive a semi-truck, and it was that truck I was driving on April 10th. It was a freezing Monday. The week was just starting, and many loads needed to be delivered. So I was trying to deliver everything as quickly as possible. I started driving at 3 in the afternoon and planned to reach my destination that same night. I didn't want to have to stop to sleep. After midnight, I started driving 10 kilometers per hour above the speed limit, which is quite fast for a semi-truck. I was beginning to feel very tired, but there was only 1 hour left until my destination, and I thought I could make it without stopping. My eyes were starting to get heavy, and it was getting hard to keep them open. I put some water in my hand and rubbed it on my face, which made me slightly more awake. My truck was the only vehicle on that road at that hour, so apart from the light from my headlights, the road was completely dark. I clearly remember when I grabbed my water bottle to take a sip and almost spit it all over the wheel when I saw a black figure on the road ahead, approaching quickly. I slammed on the brakes, and as the truck slowed down almost to a stop, I could see better the appearance of that person standing almost in the middle of the road. The man seemed to be wearing black clothes and had some kind of black scarf wrapped around his neck. He had a very long neck, so long that it was almost abnormal, and I know it's a strange thing to notice in a person, but his neck was so long it was almost eerie. However, his face was a complete blur, and I couldn't make out any features of his face. When my truck slowed down and approached this mysterious man, I was almost lowering my window to ask if he needed help, but he just turned to his left and sprinted towards the forest. At that moment, I didn't think much about that strange situation. I just stepped on the accelerator and continued my journey. I was in a hurry. To be honest, it was only about 20 seconds later that my heart really started to race, because only then was I really realizing how strange that situation had been. 5 minutes passed, and I started to feel calm again, but suddenly something else happened. When I was speeding again, I saw something in front of me running on the road. At first, it looked like an animal, but as I got closer and it ran into a forest, I realized it looked like a person. I didn't even touch the brakes this time. I just kept going at high speed. I continued down the road and even pressed the accelerator a little more as I was starting to get a bit scared and wanted to get there faster. However, I was getting increasingly tired, and sometimes I even drifted into the other lane without realizing it. There were about 40 minutes of the journey left, and I didn't know if I could finish the entire route. I started looking for a good place to park, and eventually, I spotted a small dirt entrance by the side of the road. I think it must be one of those rest stops made for parking cars. I pulled into that dirt area with my truck, set the handbrake, reclined my seat, and closed my eyes. I couldn't sleep for even an entire hour and woke up suddenly in the middle of the darkness. I still can't say exactly what woke me up, but as soon as I looked outside through my truck's windshield, my instinct was telling me to turn on the headlights. So, I turned on the headlights, and the lights illuminated the area in front of me, but there was something in front of the truck. A man. The same man with a black scarf I had seen in the middle of the road. But now I could see his face more clearly. He had a very wide smile, and his eyes were as wide open as possible. He looked directly at me through the windshield. With my heart almost coming out of my mouth, I started the engine and got out of that dirt rest area as quickly as possible. I didn't know what to think. How was it possible that he had walked 20 kilometers from the place where I had seen him the first time? I didn't stop again that night until I reached my destination. When I arrived at my destination, I fell asleep in the parking lot there and woke up early the next morning. When I woke up, the only logical explanation I could think of was that my tired mind had tricked me because I had seen many strange things the previous night, but I had never heard of a hallucination being so vivid and terrifying. I never went through anything like what I experienced that night again, and the fact that it seemed so real is what haunts me to this day. Before I got an office job in the city, I worked driving a truck for a delivery company. The salary was reasonable, and I liked the job most of the time, but there were also bad moments. It was 2012, and I had been out of college for 2 years. I was working from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. on a Wednesday. We were in the peak of winter, so it got dark around 5:30 p.m. I didn't live in a fancy part of a big city. I lived in a small town that wasn't very nice. The area where I lived wasn't entirely a slum, but it certainly wasn't very safe either. I frequently made deliveries in that area. The housing situation in my town was strange. Some blocks had rows of houses and shacks spaced far apart from each other, while other blocks were completely uninhabited, with no houses. This resulted in fewer deliveries for me since the houses were so far apart that each delivery took longer than usual. The deliveries of the day were marked on the map so that I could always take the most strategic route instead of delivering in a random order. After several hours of delivering that day, passing through 3 different small towns, I started to enter a street that was in one of those blocks I mentioned earlier. It was a street with many small houses and shacks that were very spaced out. On one side of the street, there were houses and shacks, and on the other side, there was a forest. It was around 6 p.m., my shift was ending, and I didn't have many deliveries left to make. There was a small isolated house on that street that was more like a shack, and the package had to be signed by the recipient, which meant I couldn't just leave it on the porch. I stopped in front of the house, went to the back of the truck, and grabbed the largest and heaviest box of the day. It seemed like there were metal pieces clashing inside the box, lots of pieces. I couldn't even imagine what was inside, but my job was just to leave the box at the front door, and that's exactly what I did. There was no doorbell at this house, so I had to knock on the door. However, I didn't see any lights on inside, and I also didn't see any car parked outside, so I was hoping someone was home. I knocked on the door a few times, and then I saw the curtain of one of the windows move and heard footsteps approaching the door. There was a long pause, an unnecessarily long and suspicious pause, before the person finally opened the door. An older woman poked her head out with a slightly paranoid expression, and when I said she had a package to sign, she finally opened the door completely. She seemed uneasy when I asked her to sign my electronic device. She finally signed, and the signature was very sloppy. She told me I would need to help carry the box to her room. I kind of expected her to ask for help because of her weak appearance. The moment I entered that house, I smelled a strong stench. Every house usually has a distinct smell, whether good or bad. The smell of this house was terrible, and I couldn't tell exactly what was causing it. She was guiding me to the back of the house, which was behind the small living room. She led me to a narrow hallway where I was struggling to carry the box, and then she led me to a door. She opened the door and told me to place the box inside the closet at the back of that room. I asked her to turn on the light, and she said the light was broken. The room was almost completely dark. The only light source was the light from the living room that crossed the hallway and filtered into the room. I could barely see as I tried to maneuver the box inside. I entered the room carefully, straining my eyes to see. I was halfway across the dark room when I got closer to the closet. In the middle of the darkness, I saw a person standing inside the closet. I was sure it was a person because of the shape of the silhouette, and I saw this person moving in the corner of the closet. There was no logical explanation for this. The person was clearly trying to hide from me, waiting for me to approach. With adrenaline rushing through my body, I quickly put the box down and started to walk out of the room. I hurried past the woman and said, "Have a great night." She started yelling at me to come back and help, even calling me names. I don't know what this woman and the person inside the closet were planning to do, and I didn't want to stay there to find out. I finished my shift that day, went home, and immediately started looking for a better and safer job the next day.